because all of those forces were emboldened, weren't they, by Trump? So I definitely think that we should start by cheering the fact that Trump is on his way out, probably along with many others, all the people that protest at different times across the globe. Now, of course, he's not going quietly, is he? He's not even conceded defeat yet, threatening legal action and all sorts. So it could actually be a very volatile few months before the inauguration of Biden in January. And Trump has always been unpredictable, and he could aim to cause maximum disruption in that time. But I think we also then need to think as well, though, while celebrating that he's gone, we have to prepare for the battles to come. Because as happy as we are to see Trump go, clearly Biden is not the answer. He's going to rule in the interest of the corporate establishment. I think really his presidency will mean a continuation of austerity, a lack of real action over climate chaos, probably backing for war. Because just to give a few examples, although Biden made actually Trump's terrible handling of COVID absolutely central to his election campaign, he doesn't back universal healthcare. You'd think this would be something he would do, because it would obviously help millions of people during a pandemic. Actually, back in March, Biden said he would veto a public healthcare plan. And really his opposition to Medicare for all is part of his absolute commitment to neoliberalism. During the campaign, on another issue, Biden made clear his support for fracking, for example. No really serious concessions either made to the Black Lives Matter movement. I mean, in some ways it was a nod to the Black Lives Matter movement to pick Kamala Harris as his running mate. And it's good to see more women and more women of colour in position. And I think the social media graphic that went around showing all the white men that had come before her was very stark. But Kamala Harris is very much of the establishment and has been part not only of the establishment in an abstract way, but, you know, district attorneys, general attorneys enforcing law and the role of the police in many cities. And actually, what did Biden say about the Black Lives Matter movement? One of the solutions would be for the police to be trained to shoot people in the legs. That way, at least they wouldn't kill anybody. So there's lots more you could go into really around these issues, but showing that really Biden is not going to be bringing about these big changes. And I think, to be honest, there was not a great enthusiasm for Biden, because actually, far from it being the landslide victory, much of the liberal media and commentators were predicting prior to the election, the actual vote was pretty narrow. I mean, the election has seen the highest turnout since 1900. And yes, Biden has received more votes than any candidate in US election history. I think now it's over 77 million. But Trump has gained the second highest tally ever in US history. He's got nearly 72 million votes now. It's actually an increase of nearly 9 million compared with 2016. And although Biden's win is now being celebrated by liberal media, in reality, that's not a great result, is it really? Given the situation, perhaps it's quite remarkable, given Trump's disastrous handling of the COVID pandemic. It's killed nearly 250,000 people in the US. It's thrown some 26 million people have been thrown out of work. And actually, you could almost see that then without COVID-19, perhaps Trump may have won. It's quite remarkable in that way. And not only that, but, you know, why was Biden's vote really, why was it so narrow as well? And his vote kind of underwhelming in that way. Back in 2016, you know, the Democrats blamed the email scandal, they blamed Russia, they blamed Bernie Sanders. Oh, just make sure everyone's on mute there, I think. Be better. So, just saying, back in the when they lost in
Sorry, I'm going to remove that person. I'm going to remove that person. It won't take very long, I hope.
Okay, no worries. The joys of Zoom.
I'm just going to find them.
Yeah, I'll let you do that. Do you want me to wait till you've done that?
She might interrupt again, I think, but...
Okay, I'll let you do that then.
No, they've gone now. Thank you, Wendy. Sorry about that, Amy.
No worries. Okay, so I was just saying that, you know, the fact that it wasn't a runaway landslide lead for Biden. In 2016, when Clinton didn't win, the Democrats blamed the email scandal, Russia, Bernie Sanders, whatever. There's really nowhere for them to hide this time, because all of the establishment was totally teed up behind Biden. But I think the point here is this and this approach did not motivate voters. And I think more it was because he wasn't Trump than what he was for. One poll showed that 56% of Biden voters said they backed him because he was not Trump. And I think this is borne out by the other results. Actually, the Democrats did quite badly in the House of Representatives, where they lost seats. They're unlikely to take control of the Senate, and also in the state legislatures. The state legislatures matter because this is actually where issues such as abortion rights and police funding are decided. But actually, the Democrats failed to win control of these chambers in Texas, North Carolina, Iowa, Pennsylvania, and Michigan. And what I think you can draw as a conclusion from this is that people went and voted against Trump, if you like, in the presidential election, but then didn't vote Democrat, or maybe didn't vote at all in the other elections on the same day. And I think here you see Biden's promise of a return to normal did not inspire the millions of people for whom normal failed. Because there really is a deep bitterness and anger in the US, which particularly has been building up since the economic crash of 2009, but predates that as well. I mean, US workers work some of the longest hours in Western countries, very low pay. I mean, when Trump entered the White House, 4 years ago, average real hourly wages were no more, these are real terms, than they were in 1972, and very few holidays as well. And I think we saw how Trump tapped into anger and discontent in 2016 because he posed, if you like, as an outsider to that political establishment that had failed so many people. He posed as a fake friend to the working class. And that's a strategy that's continued to resonate with many people. And I think it shows the danger of relying on a mainstream liberal message to win against the right wing at a time when there's a deep crisis for capitalism. You know, the promise of a return to normal that didn't work for millions of people is not a motivator, and Biden offered no solutions to that crisis. And as I say, him himself is not offering change particularly, but also he's the corporate choice in many ways. I mean, we've identified for a long time that both Democrats and Republicans are parties of business and capital. Historically, the Republicans very much had the support of big capital, if you like, a relationship with the bulk of the corporate rich. Actually, that began to change a bit with this election. Twice as many of the big company CEOs gave money to Biden's campaign than they did to Trump's. Biden's campaign raised something like $200 million from donors that gave at least $100,000 each. This was twice as much as what Trump raised and comes from the rich and the corporations. Now, in contrast to this, Trump did motivate his base of support. As I say, something like nearly 72 million people voted for him. I think it's nearly 9 million more than last time. It shows the resilience, if you like, of his right-wing populism. And I think he was able to motivate his base by a focus on the economy, downplaying the COVID crisis, and using racist and nationalist rhetoric combined with attacks on the left. I mean, Trump used scapegoating, really, didn't he, and lies about jobs that could resonate. You know, fear-mongering, be afraid of the immigrant will take your job. You know, repeated attacks on Muslims, Mexicans, refugees, Black Lives Matter protesters. That can chime with people looking for scapegoats. You know, it can tap into a deep bitterness in the US society, but direct the anger against migrants and others. And clearly, Trump is not on the side of ordinary people, whatever their race or gender, but that's what he's capitalised on, that disillusion and bitterness, to try and divert the anger away from those at the top. And precisely because the Democrats didn't offer a different way forward, some of those rotten ideas can take hold in that way. And we're beginning to get some, you know, indication of the base of support in the election. Actually, wealthy Americans supporting Trump outside the corporate elite, so not the ones necessarily part of the corporate elite, but those outside, the ones that have done quite well under Trump, but as I say, not part of the absolute corporate elite. Surveys showing that those whose family income was more than £76,000 a year, half of those supported Trump. Also clearly did well in rural and small town America, got a large vote, as well as votes from socially conservative groups. And there's been some discussion in the media about whether Trump made inroads at this election with non-white voters. I think we have to be clear, any inroads were very slight. Vast majority of non-white voters voted Biden, But it does draw out that the non-white vote is not monolithic. It is also divided by class and other views. For example, much of Florida's Cuban community are quite anti-socialist and conservative, having left Cuba, and they back Trump by 55% as against 42% for Biden. But black people voted overwhelmingly for the Democrats by around 88 to 90%. But I think overall what we're seeing as the results come out here is a continuation and deepening of some of those processes we saw being played out in the 2016 election. So what does this mean for us now? Well, Biden clearly represents the centre ground, the mainstream corporate agenda, and probably for many of those at the top of US society, he represents a safe pair of hands who can steer the US state. There could be attempts at a bit of a modest shift away from some aspects of Trump's policies, the neoliberalism and protectionism. There's been some talk by Biden, the promises of some talk of taxing the rich, some insipid version, if you like, of state intervention. In reality, it's likely his package of policies will be watered down due to the fact that they won't control the Senate, and anything that could seem radical anyway will probably be ditched. But it's also true Biden faces other constraints. Obviously, the impact of the pandemic itself, of course, on people's health, but also on the economy. It would seem from the data that's come out over the last few weeks, economic recovery is flatlined. I mentioned earlier as well about 26 million people being thrown out of work. Now, of course, a vaccine that people are saying is going to be ready could be a game changer, but that is not going to be available till the spring. And in the US, even more than here, there is a big question of who will have access to it, who can actually afford to get that. And economic prospects in general have not been good. There's been a whole long-term pattern of low profit and low investment, leading to quite stagnant levels of growth. And then there is the continued threat from the far right, because the failure of Trump to win does not mean that those elements just disappear. We've seen the rise of groups, haven't we, like the Proud Boys, fascist militias, conspiracy theorists like QAnon, all have grown more confident under Trump. Like I say, he gives them confidence. You know, he told the Nazi gang, the Proud Boys, recently, didn't he, to stand back and stand by ahead of voting, giving tacit support to QAnon conspiracy theorists, you know, which is actually a favourite mobilising tool of anti-Semites and racists. We remember back in 2017 when Heather Heyer was murdered by fascists in Charlottesville, Trump actually said there are some very fine people on both sides. And these right-wingers and beyond have really fed off Trump's regime of deportations, internment camps, constant racist scapegoating. And we saw armed fascist convoys even on election day and attempts at voter intimidation. And I think here then we have to be clear that this situation of crisis in society can actually lead to more Trumps emerging, if you like. The crisis can help nurture more Trumps. Trump himself may have gone, but Trumpism is likely to continue. But what does this mean for the left? Because I do think we have to be clear, polarisation has not just been one way. It runs to the right, but it also runs to the left. And really there have been powerful and inspiring mass movements and resistance of struggle springing up repeatedly under Trump's reign. Since 2017, Trump's inauguration, there's actually been very high levels of mobilisation in the US, even before the Black Lives Matter movement. In fact, 5 of the largest movements in US history have taken place during Trump's presidency, apparently. Think of the huge women's marches of something estimated 3 to 5 million after his inauguration. Think of the massive protests that took place about the Muslim ban and his assaults on Muslims and migrants then at the border with Mexico. In fact, one survey found that 20% of Americans, so 1 in 5 people, said they had participated in some kind of mobilisation since Trump was inaugurated, mainly against him. And there's also been modest increases in strikes, including teachers, and something like 1,200 or more wildcat strikes that happened earlier this year, many in response to unsafe workplaces as a result of COVID. And then you have the Black Lives Matter movement, the crowning act, if you like, of the resistance. I'm just going to time myself if that's okay, Hugh. It's better not to send me a message if you don't mind. He was just sending me messages on my timing. The Black Lives Matter movement is the crowning act of resistance. It involves some 26 million people across the US and was the largest mass movement in US history. And you saw how the anger at the police murder of George Floyd quickly grew into a very far-reaching struggle against a racist system. And this meant that even like places that were majority white had Black Lives Matter protests, and even places that used to be called things like sundown towns, you know, places where perhaps people wouldn't want to go out if you were black after sundown, literally for fear of being attacked. And I think this impacted also on ideas. You know, you think about the demand defund the police. I mean, that's quite a radical, usually, message that, you know, we're not going to fund the police so much. This became part of a mainstream debate in America as a consequence of this. And there's been a growing left radicalism represented by the growth, really, of the DSA, the Democratic Socialists of America. And there's actually, though, a real debate, though, going on now in the Democrat Party itself, because the Democratic establishment, you know, didn't really totally welcome the re-election of the women, known as the Squad, as a victory. You know, they want to retain the status quo, really, and the Democrat Party has been hostile to the left in it. And some Democratic leaders are even turning on the left in the party to try and deflect blame for Biden's failure to do as well as expected. For example, Democrat member in the House of Representatives, Abigail Spanberger, who actually is a former CIA agent, said, "We need to not ever use the word socialist or socialism ever again. We lost good members because of that." Actually, that's not really borne out by any facts or opinion polls. The Washington Post reported how a near majority of voters in swing districts supported the Green New Deal. Something like 53% of Americans support Medicare for all. In exit polls, 57% of voters expressed support for Black Lives Matter. Even in Florida, where moderate Democrats did badly, voters actually passed the $15 minimum wage that the left has been pushing for. So I think it's wrong to say that standing up for those sort of policies won't work. They just haven't really been tried in any coherent mass way by the Democrat Party. And I think, but there's a real argument of the Democrats to sort of moderate their message and push for more electoral solutions. That's really what we've just seen in this election. And I think really there has to be an argument that the left needs to offer more than that. It needs to offer a strategy looking towards those broader forms of struggle that goes beyond and outside of the Democratic Party itself. Like I said, you know, the Democratic Party is clearly a party of capitalism. It's not even the equivalent of the Labour Party here. The Labour Party here, as we know, has some connection to the organised working class through the trade union bureaucracy and the funding. That's not the case for the Democratic Party, as I've outlined. But much of the left did end up backing Biden's campaign. And it was almost like what they call lesser evilism. But that embrace of lesser evilism means that the system that produced Trump is untouched. And I think, I don't know if people saw our SWP live event on Sunday night, where we had Virginia Rodino, who's in our sister organisation, Marks 21. And I thought she said some very important things, because she sort of identified how, as well, some big mass movements, not just recently, but throughout history, often sort of end up being co-opted by the Democratic Party. The Democratic Party can almost act as a shock absorber to that radicalism. The movements go up, but then it all goes into this idea of getting electoral change. But as she put it, movements go to die in the Democrats. And she also then in a recent interview said that really those on the left have to stop thinking that corporate-backed presidents are in any way the key to fight for progressive change. And really pointing out this big danger that movements and workers' resistance just get corralled behind the Democrats, and in this case, Biden, and don't fundamentally put forward idea of bigger change and contestation on the agenda. So to sum up, because I think I'm coming to the end here now, Hugh, if that's okay, I think that preparing for battles under Biden is key. Lots of liberal fawning in the media is taking place, but Biden and Harris are not progressives. Their records are withstanding with the 1% against ordinary people and dragging the Democrats to the right. As I said, Biden promised a return to normal, but that's what's led to Trumpism in the first place. And I think, therefore, it's crucial that left and socialism people orientate on those really inspirational movements that are not an abstract pipe dream, have happened and taken place in the US over the last 4 years. As I said, whether it's climate, the women's marches, Black Lives Matter, and also that increase of interest in socialist ideas. Because I think these movements and these struggles of workers that have also taken place point the way to actually how you can defeat the right and also win the battles against the Democratic administration that will break out, but also for a much better politics than what is on offer from Biden, that puts on the agenda much more fundamental change. And that's the space that the left and progressives and socialists need to try and occupy around that ideas of struggle, rather than just to focus on the Democrats and Biden at this stage. Ends. To be able to answer all the questions, I'm sure this discussion will go on. Great to hear from our comrades in Portland. And I think Noel has really showed to us actually just how arcane and undemocratic the electoral system is in America, something that we've become more familiar with, haven't we, over the last week as we've tried to make sense of it. But I think you really brought that home to us in that way. And look, it's a bit strange, obviously, we've got someone from Portland actually there for me to comment in some ways, but from where I'm standing and looking at Trump and what people are saying about, is that, because people are asking what's going to happen, what obviously, will he leave or not? Well, with Trump, I don't really rule out anything. As I said, he is very unpredictable. Who knows in that way? I have to be saying, though, all weekend he was playing golf. That wasn't really a fighting attitude, was it, in some ways, in terms of rallying in that way? I think that really, though, what you're also seeing is that he has, in part, helped transform the Republican Party, but you are seeing Republicans not speaking against him and saying he's got to go, but not speaking for him either, particularly. And their probably eyes on 2024, the next candidate. You know, the whole strategy doesn't, as people have said, Trumpism can continue without Trump. And there may be ways of waiting that out in that way. I mean, it's absolutely right. The legal challenges, again, good to hear from our comrades in America, but it's very different to the year 2000 when I think it was contested in Florida. It was roughly about 500 votes in it. I mean, some of these places were talking about 50,000 votes, and in the popular vote, Biden has won by over 5 million. So, you know, it's not really having the same. And also the cost of actually legally challenging all those. I mean, I've heard a commentator saying that just contesting Florida nearly broke them, never mind all the ones that Trump's talking about. So I don't really see how that's going to play out. And I don't think that the Republican Party itself and other areas of establishment are so wedded to Trump as an individual that they'd go and do that, but their project can continue without him in that way. And I think people made some very interesting points, because clearly 72 million votes is a lot. And I think we have to be careful here. We cannot say that all those 72 million people are fascists, or all of them are hardened racists, irredeemable, or whatever. But clearly, Trump did use very racist rhetoric and scapegoating. And actually, part of the project for the far, far right, if you like, and that's is how do you use, be part of that milieu and harden up a base further? That's something parties look to do. But the task is as well, how do you break that? How do you break a hold of people and drive a wedge in people that 72 million people, as I say, we cannot write off as irredeemable racists or worse fascists, but we have to understand about where that's come from. And I think you have to locate this, as people have talked about the very, very deep crisis in American society, but actually it's part of a global crisis of capitalism. And if you were to look at the last 10 or so years, an increasing polarisation in many areas of the country, where if you look at elections, you might use the term, the insurgent has made the running. Not the mainstream politicians that offered more of the same that has not solved the problems, but a radical right or a radical left offering some alternative. I think many of us have felt inspired by Sanders in the past and felt actually his radicalism could have taken on Trump in a different way and offered hope and inspiration and won back some of those different elements in that way. And here, that's the point, isn't it, about the left projects that we're part of? Because I think people have talked about how struggle itself changes ideas, often involved when there's political arguments going on as well. But how are you to provide that point and of focus? And I think it's right to draw some comparisons and lessons for Starmer here and the Labour Party. Because of course the Labour Party, as people have said, is not the same as the Democratic Party, but you can see in both lefts, either both within those and outside, focusing completely on an electoral struggle, a complete focus on getting hold of positions electorally in Britain in Parliament, obviously the US presidency, the Senate, the House of Representatives in America, but almost, and as we've seen in Britain, getting hold of them and then managing the system of capitalism itself, which exerts massive pressure not to challenge those at the top and those elites. But worse as well is within those organisations, when we look at the Democratic Party and people going into it out of some of the real struggles, whether it was the civil rights movements of the 60s to more recent ones, actually joining out of a radicalism and thinking this is a route for change, the pressure of unity within the party, just like we've seen the pressure of unity within the Labour Party, actually forces the left to make those concessions. Let's not have some, I don't know, view of the Democrats in the past even. I mean, Black Lives Matter movement didn't start under Trump. The first Black Lives Matter movement started actually under Obama, because police officers killed black people under Obama. I believe that Obama started the immigration policies, I think I'm right in saying, that have led to the separation of people from countries like Mexico and others. Horrific policies, actually. These didn't just start under Trump. And what you end up with is people coming for a wanting change, absolutely corralled into, to get elected, the idea for unity, you have to be mainstream, you have to toe the line, actually ending any radicalism and any focus on struggle outside those existing structures, be it Parliament or the electoral system in the US. And that is what is immensely, immensely damaging to those projects. And that is why we're different. I mean, I can't predict whether there'll ever be a different left party in America. It's an argument that people should break, actually, and form something, not just a Democrat Mark II, just like we don't argue in Britain for a Labour Party Mark II, but a party based on struggle. But there is an existence, revolutionary organisations there. And actually, whether or not those parties exist, struggles have broken out and will continue to break out. And the question I would say for people like ourselves as revolutionaries who want change, that has to be our focus. And it is not an abstract thing for me to say, well, there'll be some struggles. We have seen masses and millions of people on the streets of a whole range of issues, and in the workplaces. People have talked about fast food rights, but also teachers out on strikes. Very important in America as well. These are crucial. And what we don't want is an outcome that says, well, hold off taking action because we've got to, we've got to support Biden. And if we oppose him, it will lead to more Trump. No, actually building those movements is precisely what can help undercut the basis of Trumpism by offering a different solution to the crisis. One based on mass collective action, pushing up at the real elites at the top and actually challenging the corporate nature of society and capitalism itself. And that means the intervention of socialism revolutions within those movements and working with people at the same time as organising. And that's why I would finish by saying that anyone here, I don't know everybody, and it seems to be an international meeting, but we've got representatives from the Socialist Workers' Party and Marx 21, our sister organisation, join us in that struggle, because it's here in Britain and it's also in the US. And actually, this is a time of deep crisis. Nothing is inevitable. What we do can make a difference, but we cannot be, if you like, cocooned just in the middle of parliamentary politics and being corralled within the structures of either the Democratic Party or the Labour Party itself. So join us for how we can bring about, fight for much more fundamental change based on those struggles we see outside of Parliament and outside that official parliamentary system's ends.